Hey, welcome. So glad that you're joining us. My name is Susie Schultz. I'm the Executive Director of the Museum of Broadcast Communications, and here's to you, happy half hour. So glad that you're joining us. And this is another show where we are showing you some of the wonderful things that are out there that the museum covers. You know, you can't visit us now. We are locked down like every other museum in the state, but we can bring you some of the wonderful magic that we do. Those are the NBC chimes. It's one of the wonderful artifacts that we have in the museum. And today, what I'm really thrilled about is that we're going to go to her in a minute. I'm going to tell you about a couple of other things. We're going to be talking to somebody and looking at television. So we know that the Broadcast Museum covers radio, television, and digital. And so while you can't visit us, you can visit our site, greatdebates.org. It is looking at the election and the effect of the broadcast world on the debates as well as on the campaigns. It's a really rich site. Not only does it have a 100-year timeline on it, but it has a number of articles about how when the broadcast industry evolved and reiterated, it really disrupted what was going on in campaigns. And there are also, for any of you in education, there are eight little modules of curriculum that overlay on top of the core curriculum that go for middle and high schoolers, and those are open source for anybody to use. And we really would love lifelong learners as well as teachers and students to take part in that online exhibit that we're having. So today we're having a conversation, and today our guest is the amazing academic and author Susan Douglas. Susan, welcome. We're so
Thanks
glad
for
to have
having me,
you here.
Susie. I'm glad to
Great,
be
great, great.
here.
Now, Susan, you have been studying television for quite a long time, right? Will you
Yes,
give
ma'am.
you you have a number of books. I love the titles. Just reading the titles makes me happy. Enlightened Sexism: The Seductive Message That Feminism's Work Isn't Done. The Mommy Myth: The Idealization of Motherhood, How It's Undermined All Women. I love that. Celebrity: A History of Fame. And the latest book that you have is In Our Prime: How Older Women Are Reinventing the Road Ahead, right?
Yes.
Mhm. And so tell me a little bit about, before I know you're going to read for us, which I'm thrilled about, but tell me a little bit about how this book came about.
Well, as you noted, I've been writing about the media for a long time, radio and television. And my first book that was on the representations of women in the media, particularly television, but also magazines and films, looked at the evolution of imagery that surrounded baby boom women for the time baby boom women were young until, the early 1990s, which is when I finished that book. And, my books that have been about the representations of gender in the media have kind of followed my own autobiography a bit. And so the motherhood book was when I had an infant and a toddler, and my life did not represent remotely the idealized images of motherhood that we saw in women's magazines with all these celebrity mothers with their miracle babies in their white living rooms with their white rugs and their white sofas with toddlers. And and then enlightened sexism was really, I was looking at a real generational divide in how what was being represented to my daughter, who was then a teenager growing up, and what was being represented to me about gender roles. And they were actually quite different. So, when I finished that book, I was, of course, advancing along in years and was interested in something that had been really, really understudied, which is how have older women been represented in the media? And I thought I'd dig into that. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, and it is fascinating. The idea of the older woman is once you are married and have children, then all of a sudden you're a grandmother. Um, and And you're certainly, we've had there's been many conversations from women in Hollywood, especially in recent years, about what it means to be marginalized and how they are redeveloping roles for themselves, and that is also true on television, which is very exciting because it is to remove older women from the whole discourse and from the impact of the broadcast world has a huge effect on people. And I would, yeah, go ahead.
No, it does. And, one of the things that I'm arguing in the book is that we are at a turnstile moment where, on the one hand, ageism and especially gendered ageism remains one of the most acceptable biases in our country. And there are many ways in which older women are erased, rendered invisible, so on and so forth. However, there is also a group now of a-list celebrities who are not really interested in being put out to pasture. And they're very talented and they have a loyal fan base among us. And so you see women like Bette Midler, Sally Field, Meryl Streep, Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, um, and others continuing to be leads in movies, Helen Mirren, and to be leads in television shows. And women like me and many other women my age are applauding this because when you have famous women and celebrities, even though they may be slimmer and more gorgeous than the rest of us, they are really important role models, staking a claim for the visibility of older women in the media.
It is really, really crucial. And I was hoping that you might be able to read a little bit of the book so that people get a taste of it. And then let's dig back into some of these celebrities and some of the history on it, which is fascinating.
Sure, I'll just read a little bit from the beginning.
Great.
So, I am a baby boomer, and thus a woman, as we would say politely, of a certain age. And as I blink my eyes and wonder, as so many of us do these days, how did I get here? I am feeling once settled tectonic plates rumbling beneath our feet, changing what it means to be an older woman in America. They are especially shifting about what older women want and how we see ourselves. While not yet widely noticed, given everything else on our nation's overcrowding and hyperventilating screens, it is an impending and major upheaval in our cultural terrain. On the one hand, our culture seems intent on trying to rope women of my vintage off into a honey-hued, quiet, quilted preserve where we are as relevant and as stimulating as pet rocks. All too many drug ads on television, for example, suggest that we are supposed to go plant peonies and play peekaboo with our grandchildren unless we're as beautiful and famous as Mirren or Susan Sarandon and can be commissioned to be the face of a skin company. We're also supposed to keep quiet about and ignore the muscular efforts by the mostly white haired men our age or older to reverse so many of the gains women of our generation achieved. On the other hand, the ropes are giving way because the numbers are adding up. There are more women over the age of 50 than ever before in our country, and millions of us are not pottering in the garden or inclined to say, okay, whatever, to the trashing of our legacy, the mowing down of women's rights, the marginalizing of our generation, what we have accomplished, and who we are. So I see this as a major turnstile moment in our culture and our history. Look around. Women over 50 and well beyond are everywhere. Now, remember, I wrote this before the COVID pandemic, working, shopping, traveling, going to concerts, yoga studios, restaurants, and bars, and importantly, working to get more women elected to public office, as well as serving in public office themselves. Many feel that they are in their prime. Let me just. So the question before us then is this: there is something incongruous here between our flesh and blood visibility in everyday life, the vitality of our past and present, our ongoing feminist concerns and energy, and our invisibility or dismissal in so many sectors of our country's cultural imagination. So here is the question. Are we going to accept this manufactured invisibility or rip off the invisibility cloak? Many increasingly impatient women are saying, let's choose option B. To do so, we need to confront our medias, our cultures, and our own dismissive attitudes about aging, especially for women, and how they seek to marginalize and silence us culturally, economically, and politically. And we need to do so with humor, irreverence, and yes, anger.
So
So just a
and
brief
real.
answer.
I wanted to read because I think it's very delightfully written. I think you have a wonderful style, and I didn't want people to be. I want people to understand your academic background and how that is really important and seminal. But very often that academia idea puts people off. And this is a book that many people will enjoy, many people will be interested in, and many people will not want to put down. It's just fascinating. So I was wondering if too you could tell people a little bit about how you move on with the book and how it's set up.
Okay, so just to respond to that, your comment, the first feminist book I wrote was called Where the Girls Are, and it was about growing up female with the mass media as baby boom women. And, the stereotype about feminists is that we don't have a sense of humor, right?
Right.
Humorless, strident, women. Feminists could not get from one end of the day to the next without a sense of humor.
Oh my
And
God, yes.
what I discovered with Where the Girls Are, because Where the Girls Are was mouthy and it was irreverent, it was meant to be funny. And what the humor did is it allowed men into the book as well, which was something I hadn't thought of. And so all of my books about women have sought to use humor because I think it invites people in. It debunks the stereotype that feminists don't have a sense of humor, and it makes a book more fun to read. And it allows me to make fun of media images that I think are retrograde and stereotypical and stupid. so um, so basically, what I did is I thought it was important in the book after doing the setup about how we're at this turnstile moment where there's still gendered ageism in many sectors of the media, but also a lot of women, famous and everyday, are pushing against that. As I wanted to
Mhm.
retrieve the history of what our generation of women in the 70s and 80s accomplished. And I mean, we changed the world. This was one of the most important social movements of the late 20th century. And there's been some amnesia about that. So I wanted to correct that. And then I thought it was important to have some fun with the, over the counter prescription pharmaceutical ads that bombard us every time we watch cable news, the Weather Channel, the nightly news with diseases we've barely heard of, can't pronounce. And, so I really did have a good time with that. And one of the things I found there is that a lot of those ads are selling what I'm calling aspirational aging, which is very positive. It's nice to have a counter stereotypical image. We don't want image of aging to be that we're all like decrepit and doddering and grumpy and clueless about technology and have no idea what Facebook or Twitter are, etc. And it's great to see older people who are energetic and having a good time and going out to dinner and so on and so forth. However, in these big pharma ads, they still equate being older with having all these diseases, again, some of which you've never heard of, and that the way to really have a satisfying older period of your life is to take all these drugs. So, and we're the only country besides New Zealand that allows the advertising, of direct to consumer, prescription drug ads. We're the only country, and these big pharma companies spend two, three, four times as much on marketing and advertising as they do on R&D.
And
So
I think
then I thought,
I want to add, I think it's very funny that when you talk to people about advertising and its impact, the majority of people will say things such as, it really has no impact on me. And then you start to sing a jingle, and they will be able to finish it because the insidiousness of it is that people do spend billions of dollars on this to make it memorable and to plant itself in your head. So those images in advertising are really crucial because they affect how we think about people day in and day out, and about age groups, as you're talking about. Please go ahead. You were saying then you went did what?
well, no, you raise a really important point. We call this in the field the third person effect. Everybody else is affected by the mass media, but not me. And there's often kind of a class bias to it, like Joe Sixpack or Jane Housewife is affected, but not me. And, to write about the media, those of us who write about it have to admit that we all are affected, but nobody wants to seem like they are sucked in by the, undertow of the mass media, uh, even though, of course, we are. And, when you have the dominant messages that are everywhere, they're in magazines, they're on the news, they're on television shows, they're in the movies, they're on the radio. Those interlocking messages can't help but create a dominant framework, about whatever. And this will lead me to what the next chapter was. My daughter and I, when we get together, and this is again pre-COVID, she'd want to go to Sephora, and I confess I did too. And, we'd leave there with, the equivalent of a car payment's worth of, crap in those black and white bags. And I just thought I wanted to have some fun with the anti aging industrial complex, because that is something that is everywhere. We women in particular are repeatedly, insistently, over and over told to defy aging. Defy it. So we're
Right.
supposed to defy an ineluctable biological process that no one can avoid and do so with cosmetics and serums and anti-aging this and that costs like $80 for 1/10 of an ounce. And so I did have a lot of fun with that chapter, and how anti-aging products are pushed to us through the media. um, and then I did something on the visibility revolts of these celebrity women who are saying, excuse me, no, we're not going to be put out to pasture. We want to open movies. We want to have TV shows that are about getting older. And if you look at the Facebook page for Grace and Frankie, my God, that show alone has so many fans of people, and not only women, saying thank you for showing that older age can be fun and interesting, and and yet they also take on ageism as
And
well.
for those who don't know, Grace and Frankie is a Netflix show as well that it's features Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, and they are a pair of women whose husbands immediately in the first episode, and it's now been several seasons, come out as partners, and they were partners and friends in a law firm, and they are in love, and they're a gay couple, and so these two women are thrown together to try to cope with life in this phase, and it's delightful. It's a little corny, it's a little crazy, it's a little irreverent. It is everything that television is, except, focusing on a certain age group, focusing on the challenges and the problems, and much more viscerally and directly than, say, a Golden Girls, where there were jokes, and and it was also delightful in so many ways, but some of the problems were brought up, but this goes deeper, correct?
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
Golden Girls is one of the most successful sitcoms ever. It is still in syndication, still. It's been in syndication for like 24 years or something. And it's really still the only show that has an ensemble cast of women over 50, living together, talking about political issues as well as social issues and personal issues. But you're right, Grace and Frankie, because it's on Netflix and they can do or say whatever they want compared to broadcast television, um, is more explicit and digs into things like female sexuality and the sexuality of older women in a way that Golden Girls could only do so, kind of obliquely.
Right, right. And would you say Golden Girls was seminal for the time? Would that be accurate?
Yes, one of the things I didn't mention is in the first chapter of the book, because there was so much activism in the 1970s, I
Mhm.
wanted to connect feminist activism with Maggie Kuhn. And Maggie Kuhn was the founder of the Grey Panthers. And one of the things, and she was a force of nature. By the late 1970s, that woman was traveling hundreds of thousands of miles around the country giving talks combating ageism. And one of the things that she did, she and her fellow Grey Panthers did, is they organized this big media watch group and they started watching television shows and documenting all of the dismissive, negative stereotypes of older people and bombarded the network heads with accusatory letters about how negatively they were portraying older people. And she actually got Claude Pepper, who was then the congressman from Florida, to hold two congressional hearings on the representations of older people in the media. And as a result of a lot of that activism, you started getting shows in the 1980s with older leads. And that is one of the reasons we got Golden Girls.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is really, really great. And you are right. I mean, there are Facebook pages with fandom people who are in the thousands and hundreds of thousands who constantly just talk about the relevancy to their life. And what I am surprised at is that they're younger people, and they are all
Yes.
relating to these older people. So,
Yeah.
we got caught here, but because there's so much more to the book too. But I love. What do you think is this this turnstile moment, this turning point? Is this is it a cyclical thing for us? Is it taking us much forward? Is it the fight we have to do where we go a little bit forward, then we come backwards, and we go keep going? Is it a moment you think that will stay, that is that critical, that's going to move us because the population is, the numbers are there? How would you describe it for where we're going to go
Well,
forward?
it's a great question, and I think there are very few social movements, progressive social movements, that move forward without pushback, right? Um, so there's always a cyclical element. I mean, ever since there's been feminism, there's like instantly been a backlash against it, or the fight for gay rights or the fight for the rights of people of color. There's always been pushback, and there will be pushback against this. The problem, you know, this book came out in March. I do not
Mhm.
recommend launching a book during a global pandemic. Um, but, so my hope of what I wanted to do, in going around and talking about this book was also talk about the kind of activism that we need. And I think one of the things we really need is much more robust partnerships among older and younger people, and particularly among older and younger women, because we don't want women in their 20s and 30s now, when they're in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, to be confronting the same kind of gendered ageism that some of us are. We want to fix that. And we also have an enormous amount in common. And younger women today have their particular feminist agenda, and we have a lot to learn from them. And we have our victories as well as our defeats, and they have a lot to learn from us. So I'm really advocating for both a lifespan feminism in the book that I think is really important. And also, what young women are advocating for, and also what I've written about in the book as well, is intersectional feminism, because it's all well and good for Helen Mirren and Meryl Streep et al. To open movies and give us role models that we can live with. But there are tens of millions of older women who are poor, who are women of color, who do not have the same kinds of resources. And so I wrote a lot about that in a chapter called The War Against Older Women. And I think those of us who are lucky and privileged cannot forget our sisters who are not so lucky and privileged. And boy, the pandemic has really, really exposed that now. And so, in terms of this being cyclical or not, it's hard to get out there and be active when we're in lockdown. But this is not going to last forever. We have our fingers crossed about these vaccines, and the pandemic has exposed a lot of inequities that I think old and young alike want to partner together about to combat, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think what I love as well about what you're writing about is that is so much part of the mission of the museum right now to um, to make sure that people are understanding that the images that they're seeing in their homes and in their pockets, because that's where a broadcast is these days, affect us, and they affect our opinions, they affect our decisions, and it is not just the story of who is part of the discourse, it's also a story about who's been left out and what the impacts are on that. And so many of the people that you're talking about, women who are people of color, and women LGBTQ, those images and those people have also, though, who are us, have very often that part of their lives haven't been concentrated on television, or they've been celebrated for their individuality. And there's a wonderful question that we ask, does television change because it is ahead of the curve, or does television change at a point where it thinks it's acceptable and these shows are allowed to come on and Ellen is allowed to come out? And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
It's such a great question. And, sometimes TV has really been behind the curve, and sometimes TV has actually been ahead of the curve. And so if you think about women in the 1950s and early 1960s, you know, uh, by the mid 1950s, women were represented primarily as housewives and mothers, maybe helpmates, secretaries, or nurses. That was it. In real life, there were more women working outside the home than ever, but that was barely represented on television. Television was hugely behind the curve in the 50s and 60s, which helped fuel the women's movement. I think by the early 2000s, because feminism had become so embedded in our culture that actually the achievements of women were overrepresented in a lot of dramas. We saw police chiefs and surgeons and law partners, everywhere on television, really overrepresenting, how many women were in those kinds of fields. And the women we didn't see, there was this brief moment in the late 80s, early 1990s when we had Roseanne and Grace Under Fire. We had a few representations of working class women, and that went away. And both in the news media, in public affairs programming, and even in dramatic or sitcom television, we just those women are erased. Working class women, women who are struggling, they're erased. And why are they? Well, you know, advertisers want aspirational images. That's what they want. Um, so, you know, you're so right that sometimes the media are ahead of the curve and sometimes they're behind.
So where do you think this movement is leading us? Do you think that we are going to finally break through permanently, or meaning that older women will be? By the way, I also have to say I love how you've written um, about the issues that are corresponding with your life. I think there's a wonderful symmetry to that, and how you choose to examine where you are in a place, because that really gives you a great lens for where stuff are. Well, where do you see us going? what's going to be happening, especially on the we seem to have gone back a little bit in maybe the last 4 years on our perceptions of women and what they need to who they need to be societally and what their structures are. Where do you think that we'll be going now?
Oh, I think there's been a big war in the country in the last 4 years around gender, and not just around women. We have had a president who has been perfectly happy and fine to, issue misogynistic comments and statements, but it's activated women of all ages to push back against that because they don't want to go back to 1956. Who wants to go back there? Nobody. Certainly women don't. Certainly people of color don't. And certainly LGBTQ folks do not want to go back to 1956. So there's a real struggle here. And, but you saw with the outpouring in the, 2017 March on Washington, the amazing outpouring around Me Too. There are tens of millions of women who want to push forward, not go back. And we have also seen more older women being visible, being lionized. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, became a huge cultural icon in her 80s. And Nancy Pelosi is still Speaker of the House. Maxine Waters has her back. So we're seeing older women in politics. We're seeing older women, in entertainment media, and we're seeing older women in the workplace. So I'll just give you a statistic here. 33% of women between the ages of 65 and 70 are still working. And 18% of women between 70 and 75 are still working. Now, some are working because they have to, especially given the rotten economic times we're in right now. But some are working because they love their jobs and they don't want to quit. So they are out there in the world. And I think the more that women are visible, the more that women have their consciousness raised and raise the consciousnesses of others that gendered ageism is discriminatory, it is marginalizing, it is full of um, really irrelevant and often completely bogus stereotypes about older women. The more that we can push back on all of this stuff, the better. So, you know, I'm sometimes glass half empty, sometimes glass half full, but I do feel that there's enough energy out there now among older women who are simply not having it with being stereotyped as clueless about technology or too old to do anything, that I think we're on a positive trajectory. And, once we get to the other side of this pandemic, I think you're going to see a lot of feminist energy coalescing because women will be able to get back together in person. And I think we're all hungry for that.
Oh boy, oh boy. I am thrilled that we are able to talk to you via Zoom, but it would be so lovely to sit down with you and talk to you face to face. I could not agree with you more. I have to say that I did grow up in a household where my mother was famous. She even ran locally for politics and stuff, and she was very famous for saying a woman will tell her age will tell anything. And as we were growing up with her, we just thought that was so silly and that was so ridiculous. And then you get into the workforce and you get in and you realize how difficult it is and how discriminatory it is and how if you tell people an age, they automatically decide everything about you before they've ever met you.
Right.
And so I think it is very it's a very personal issue for a large part of people. And I think sometimes when those numbers go, as you are saying, that personal becomes so political, and there is, that crack, that turnstile going through. So hopefully this will be a time, because I know that I certainly would benefit from that, and you would benefit from that, and so would millions of others. So would
Well,
society.
you know, I have a to-do list at the end of the book, and there are things. important and there are things trivial. But I think one really good, important thing to do is to really call out this preposterous policy in Hollywood where 60-year-old men are paired with 30 or 25-year-old love interests as if older women aren't attractive or are irrelevant or whatever. And apparently, there's this um, show, Mank, which is about the writing of um, you know, the Orson Welles movie. And Mankiewicz and Orson Welles, you know, co-wrote it. There's been some dispute about that. Anyhow, Mank is being played by Gary Oldman. And at the time, as I understand it, Mankiewicz was in his 40s. Oldman is currently in his 60s. Okay, fine. His wife is played by somebody who's like 30 years younger than he when his wife was the exact same damn age. So, it's just things like this to call out these media distortions about us is something we can do with others. Again, it might seem silly and trivial, but this has been going around on Twitter now, and it raises people's awareness of how pernicious and stupid and inaccurate these representations are.
So with that call to action, we're going to say thank you very, very much. And we really hope, Fritz, if you have a minute, will you put this sign up? Fritz, thank you so much, Fritz Goldman, for a picture of the book up, because we think that it would be a great holiday gift for people. It's fascinating and it's interesting. And we are so grateful, Susan Douglas, for your time today. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, it was my pleasure. And, I'm a huge fan of the museum because I've done research there. And I think it's just such an awesome resource. And I'm so excited about what you all are doing with it. So it was really a pleasure for me to be connected with the museum.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we hope to everybody. We hope you'll be coming back soon. We're going to be talking a little bit about our holiday campaign next week. Stay home for the holidays, where we're going to have people reading books for us. People that you'll know, people throughout Chicago. One of them will be our mayor. I know that will, for some of you, that's wonderful. For some of you, that's controversial. But we know that you're going to be safe if you stay at home. We're just not at a point where we can really be out and about with one another. And so we're hoping to give you a little bit of entertainment and some holiday stories online. So please join us for that and look for information on this page.